Turn with me this morning to James chapter 1, starting in verse 9. James chapter 1, starting in verse 9. If you know, we're starting our journey through James and looking at, as we looked at last week, about trials that we go through in life. And remember, we spoke about the reality that challenges happen to everyone, not just to some. We want to make sure we understood it's not what God is doing to us. It's so important, but to make sure we understand what God's going to do through us as we go through these trials that we are finding happening in our life. But also that inevitably what's going to come out of it. Remember, there's a key word to remember: consider. Okay, and if you think about that, that is that looking forward, that whatever we're going through, that on the other side of that, while we don't want to go through it, as we go through it, if we would allow God to do His work in what we're going through, that the results are going to be something that is of benefit to us and to His glory. Again, no one wants trials. Oh, I can't say that enough. But it's part of what happens in this thing called life that we go through. So again, this week we're going to look at, I thought about what to call this. If you remember last week we talked about help, I've fallen and I can't get up, and at that point we find ourselves at the end of ourselves. And I struggled with this one. I just named it stronger. Because when you go through trials and you find yourself going through things that are more than you can bear, it has a tendency to wear you out. But what God desires to have happen as we go through these things in life, and we trust in Him for us to come out of it stronger. So I want you to think about these things as we look at verse 9. Believers in humble circumstances ought to take pride in their high position. Now listen to that. So believers in their humble circumstances, meaning they're willing to say, Lord, I'm here. Okay. Biblically, that is seen as being a high position. You see, it's when we are willing to say, Lord, help me. It's when we are actually at a higher position, how would I say this? A perspective of the challenges we go through. Listen what he says also, verse 10. But the rich should take pride in their humiliation, since they will pass away like wildflowers. People, once again, will read this and say, see, if you have, then it's bad. Okay? Or if you don't have, if you're struggling, if you're, we automatically think about classes, don't we? The lower class, the upper class, the middle class. We go there. That's not where he is here. Because you see, we're so Western oriented, and when we hear these words, we again get the context so far off. Remember who he was speaking to here. Remember last week we talked about how James addressed the 12 tribes who were scattered. Remember we talked about there were those who were at that lower, we talked about the hard word about being a slave and how it doesn't mean what we think of it meaning today. That slave was someone who by choice hired themselves out in order to be able to make a way for their families, and they could ultimately move beyond that circumstance as well. So it wasn't like a bondage that was against their desire, like in our current times when we hear those words. So we also talked about last week how these people who were scattered were seen as less than that, because they could not even hire themselves out. They were in a much worse situation, but there were those who could. So when he's talking about rich here, okay, he's not talking about rich like we may see rich, okay? Others have often said too, maybe he was talking about those who were not believers, right? Because it's another thing. Let me say this. It's not biblical to be poor, okay? But it's likewise, it's not biblical to be rich either. It's not about, it's not, being a Christian is not about how much money you have or don't have. But we tend to do that, don't we? We see someone that has a lot, then we immediately say, you know, well, they must not be following, you know, the Lord. We stereotype. Okay, bless our hearts. You know, we stereotype. Here he's saying, whether you have or don't have, there is going to be a situation here that will happen. Here's the truth. The more we have materially, the more we feel at risk when we go through. That's true. The more stuff we have does tend to give us a false sense of security. But you know, it doesn't matter if you live in a very small, meager home, or if you live in a great lavished home. When the power goes out, the power is out. Okay? There are things that happen. It doesn't matter if a hurricane comes through. Okay? It doesn't matter if you're here or you're there. It's going to get everything. And what he's saying here is that the only difference is those who have more in their minds have more to lose. And the more we acquire, this is the humbling part, it may be something that we see that we want to show off, man. Look at what I've got. Or we may not say it, but we acted right. He's saying here, when trials come for the things that we have, it's like that wildflower. Oh, it's beautiful. But boy, it comes and goes. As soon as the scorching heat comes, it withers up and goes away. So that's what he's saying here. Trials has a way of erasing the superficial distinctions we have between the haves and the have-nots. Trials has a way of, a bad doctor's report has a way of kind of like wiping all that away. And that's what he's telling us here, okay? The very same treatment that the poor get also happens to those who have a lot. It's all about how we tend to react to it. That's why I wrote these things down. Here's some key things to consider. What makes life meaningful? Ask yourself that. What makes life really, don't give me churchy talk, right? What makes life meaningful to you and to me? So question, as we're going into a trial, that's what we should ask, because when we get upset, disappointed, down, woe is me, those kind of things, and we don't, it's all happening to me, and we get just a bad attitude, quite frankly. We might need to stop and say, what makes life meaningful to me? Also, how we respond is very important, okay? How we respond has a potential of our outcome. Are we willing to be humble and ask for help? Are we willing to be humble? We can enjoy things. See, it's not unchristian to have things. We can enjoy things. We just don't need to depend upon them. I'm going to say that again. We can enjoy things. We just need to be very careful to make sure that we don't depend upon those things. And that cannot be where our help and our hope and our strength comes from. So again, suffering shows the rich that instead of having things on earth, their lives are no more permanent than a wildflower. I was going back and looking this morning and reflecting upon this. And there was a time that, did you know that this isn't the first bad time that we've had in society? There have been world wars. There have been things like the Great Depression. It was called great because it was great. Okay, the Great Depression was not nice times. And in that time, there were those who had little and those who had a lot. And those who had less seemed to be able to adapt in the lessness. Wasn't pleasurable at all, more than the ones who had a lot. Because the ones who had a lot felt and experienced a lot of loss. And the interesting thing is, while there were those who had little, who in the Depression, sadly, may have lost their lives through starvation and sickness. Those weren't good times. And they may have lost their lives as a result of the trials they were going through. But they say there were bankers and finance people, the ones who had a lot, who took their lives. So those who had little, while they may have lost their life to the circumstance, those who had a lot took their lives because of the circumstance. That's an example of the different perspectives. So the difference was not the people going through, but what they relied upon to be, as we said a few minutes ago, what was meaningful to them in life. And that's what he's saying here. You're going to be very careful and think about that, because that's what James is encouraging his readers to make sure that they consider. Okay? While in the trial, verse 11, for the sun rises and scorches like heat, withers up the plants, its blossoms fall, and its beauty is destroyed. In the same way the rich fade away, even while they go about their business. I was watching a movie with Margaret the other night, and one of the things to remember was about taking time to think about what's important. Did you know that we can gain the whole world and lose it at the same time? We can be so caught up in work and progress, right? Here's good things, okay? There's nothing wrong with progress. There's nothing wrong with building up. We all do it, okay? It's all part of that. It's normal, okay? It's normal. But what we do, I had a friend, he used to tell me at work. He says, Bruce, I work to live, but I don't live to work. And that thing stuck with me. And we was like in the middle of an outage and some stuff was going on, and we tried, and he says, I work to live, but I don't live to work. Okay? So we do want to be productive and take care of our families, and we do want to grow. But that cannot be who we are. Because the things we have will fade away. But who you are will move on. No Rogaine. Okay. I think that's what it's called. When I was young, I had a lot of hair. I had a fro out to here. Okay? And hair matters to people. I'm telling you, don't tell me hair doesn't matter. Hair matters. It's a crazy thing. We talked about that a few weeks ago. Hair matters to people, okay? Over time, I started losing my hair, okay? And now it's gone, okay? There's all kind of stuff on TV about what you can do to get your hair back, okay? And I decided that's water in the bridge, right? But my point is this, I'm at peace, right, with who I am. There was a period of time where I just kind of like tried to keep a little bit on it, just give me a little something here. Nowadays, I put my clippers on one and roll with it, baby. It's all good. There's no need to have a little bit of, that's not gonna work, okay? Because it can't define me. And that's silly. I know that's silly. But I submit to you, I bet you have a silly something that defines you. And if it's threatened, it might rock you. Or it might be something you say is not silly. It's something I've worked hard for. Okay? And now it's being threatened. And I don't like it. And so therefore I have an attitude. And I miss this that while I'm in a trial, to know that the first thing I need to do is cling not to things. Because we are thing clingers. Okay? Cling not to things. Okay? You will recover. You will recover from the trials you go through, and you're going to come out stronger. I got a story for you. Yeah, something had happened this week, so you know me. Pastors are always looking for illustrations, okay? So here's mine. I have a barn. I know my wife is rolling her eyes right now. Oh my gosh. I have a barn. This barn is over 20-some years old. My brother-in-law, bless his heart, he keeps up with things like that. He says, we built it because he helped me build it. We built that barn back when Matthew was a baby. So it's over 20 years old, this barn that was there, okay? And by time and time, the barn started getting old, the roof started caving in, and it was kind of looking, and every day when I would come home from work and drive up in the yard and look up over that raggedy barn, I would say, man, I need to take care of that roof. Man, that sure looks messed up. Margaret would say, we need to take care of that. It's embarrassing to have people come up in our yard and see that raggedy mess up there. It looks bad. Or the horse, it's my horse barn, right? My horse would get hurt. Like right now, he has an injured foot, so he's been having a hard time. And the same thing. Man, you want to have the vet come over here and see that raggedy barn, and he's getting wet. And, we had all these things, right? But I wouldn't deal with it. I would see it, but I wouldn't deal with it. And it just kept nagging. Did you know that trials you don't deal with won't go away? Did you know that they will continue to be there, and over time, instead of getting better, they will get worse? Did you know that ignore it and it will go away is not true? Ignore it, it just gets bigger is true? And so I had all these reasons of why, it's going to be so hard. And I can't find anybody to hire, and yada, 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 da-da-da-da-da. And I finally just said, I'm done with this. I got on the phone. I called my son-in-law and said, Stacy, what you doing on Friday? And, well, you know what, da-da-da, we had our conversation. Bottom line is, we got out there and took the roof off. Now, I've got cuts. I am so sore. Margaret said, you need to take some Advil or something, right? I'm getting up like, what was his name? The guy, I forget the name of it, Real McCoy's? Okay, I feel like him. Oh, I hurt even now. I got hurt pain where I didn't even know I could have pain from doing that work. We got it off, we rebuilt it, then James Gore came over yesterday, and a friend of his, Cody, came over. They helped me put the roof back on. The bottom line is, what I lamented over for, hear me, years, is now done. Now, yes, there was pain, and I had all the reasons why I wasn't going to finish it. Even after I got started, I had, all these, how am I going to get this done? How am I going to get that done? And just different things, It was just, I had all the reasons why not until I stopped thinking about why not and started considering, okay, why it could be. Same problem, same issues, and yes, I'm sore. But you know what? It's a good sore. It's good hurt. It's good aches. Because here's a silly thing. Where I used to hate in the mornings to go out there to feed him because I felt guilty because I hadn't dealt with that roof. I know I'm silly. I could not wait until this morning to get up and go out and feed him and to see that which I always hated to see. So what was something I didn't want to deal with is now something I'm glad I dealt with. And I know that's silly. I know that's shallow, but the principles are the same. So I ask you to do that. Listen to this. We must be willing to come out of something better then we went into something. Don't confuse better with more. I'm going to say it again. Don't confuse better with more. We want to come out of it with more of what we had. Grow in what we had, don't we? We want to see increase. God tends to take us through, see us through, because that Lord, He's in the trial with us. He didn't push you into the trial. We're in the trial. He's going through it with us. He wants you to come out better and see better as being better. Okay? Better may mean you're going to come out different. Better has a way of saying there were things you thought you wanted more of that you really need least of, because what you really needed more of is going to be better. You see, I limit God. Maybe you don't. By wanting to see increase of what I have. That which I am afraid to lose. Where God may be saying, no, that's kind of why you're in this thing you're in right now, so we want to get that out of the way completely. Because I think about how Isaiah said, I'm doing a new thing. Can't you see it? And I hear God saying that to us today, right? I'm doing a new thing. A better thing. Can't you see it? But the answer is no. We can't see it. Because our eyes are too much on what we think we're losing. And we find ourselves not willing to ask and be humble. And that's why I said this. Remember to always consider. Consider, 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 consider. Look beyond what you're going through. And cast all your cares upon God. Peter said it like this. God opposes the proud, but he shows favor to the humble. Humble yourselves, therefore, in God's mighty hand, and he will do something. Don't miss this. This is coming from 1 Peter 5, starting in 5. And he will lift you up, note this, in due time. We don't like that. We don't like that. We don't like due time. We want my time. And my time is now. So I'm not going to humble myself because I want my time, not due time. The Greek word is kairos, okay? And that's in God's time. It comes back to where we talked about where faith must finish its work, okay? We talked about that trials. Remember how we have the trials and how it must finish its work. Trials must finish its work so that we'll be what? Mature and not lacking anything. We don't like that. But that's where we have to humble ourselves to recognize that God's in control if we will allow him to be. His ways are not our ways because they're better ways. Okay? But it works in his time, not our time. What is it that you're angry about or that you have just written God off about? Because you say, no, I tried that and nothing happened. Okay? My response is, nothing happened when you wanted it to happen, or nothing happened because of what you wanted to happen. Therefore, you missed what was happening, and it's all about the timing. Okay? It's all about the timing. And you miss God's timing. We do that. We really do that. Sometimes, some of us a lot. So he says, cast, verse 7. It's the same thing he said in James. What James said in James, the first part of James chapter 1 we looked at. It's the same thing Peter's saying here. Cast all your cares upon him. Why? Because, listen, because God cares for you. We don't know that God cares for us if we don't have a relationship with him. And that doesn't mean, oh, you're doing something wrong. It means we choose not to trust him. But he says here, that's what we are to remember. So I ask you today to cast all your cares upon him. And remember, there's always going to be a blessing. And this word is huge. And we'll talk more about this word in a minute. One of the key essentials, if not the key essential, really it is, that must be at the core of a believer's life. Got your pen and pad ready to write this word down? Ready? Hope. Hope. Okay. And we'll talk about that more in just a minute. Remember, there's a blessing in what you're going through. That's that consider. Consider it pure joy when you face all kinds of trials. That's remembering. Consider this. Blessed are the ones who perseveres. Okay. Blessed are the ones who perseveres in trials. Consider the other side of that trial. Okay. Not knowing what's going to happen on the end, but you know that you're going to come out of it stronger than when you went in. I also want you to remember this. Focus on the results, not the trial you're going through. Okay. As we was working on this barn, I know it's silly, but it's an analogy. Okay. I would stand back, especially when I was kind of broke up feeling, right? And look at the progress. It wasn't finished. And I must say that when I looked at it, I saw the challenges that was yet ahead to be dealt with. But I could see, I was looking at the progress of where it was now versus where it was when I lamented over it. So it wasn't done. There was still a lot to deal with, but it wasn't where it was. Okay. Call on God's resources. If anyone asks for wisdom, let him or her ask God. But when you request it, you should believe and what? Not doubt. Okay? Watch for here's a big one, watch for our reaction during the trial. Okay? When you're going through a trial, I'm just going to use this word, and you find yourself angry, okay, bitter, anger, and that happens. We do this. It's not, we're human. We do this. It's not shame on you for getting angry, or me for getting angry. It's be aware that it's happening and choose not to. In your anger, do not sin. Okay. So being angry, getting frustrated, it's not the thing that's bad. Just don't harbor it. Okay? We choose to let that go. Because we remember what James said, that human anger does not bring forth the righteousness that God desires. And that's a choice we have to let that go. So watch our reactions in the trials. And then anticipate what's going to come out on the other side. Anticipate the reward. Anticipate the finished product. And anticipate now looking forward to seeing that which you once did not want to see. Wow. So again, he talks about these things again, about this blessed is the one who perseveres in the trial. Verse 12. Listen, after having stood the test, that person will receive a crown of life that the Lord has promised to those who love him. He was in this case, because remember, they're scattered. They're persecuted. They were away from their families. Don't forget that. They were away from their homes. They, in their minds, were away from their God. Because God was only in the temple. If you weren't at the temple gates, then God was nowhere. You were alone. Okay? No home, no family, no God. Don't forget that of who he was speaking to. And yet he tells them that as you stand up through this, He takes them from beyond earth to heaven and starts speaking to them about crowns of glory. And they could see that from the various, the Colosseums, and they weren't always persecution going to Colosseums. That's where they actually had sport. They had races and all sorts of things would happen there. And so it was the one who won, right, would get this victorious crown. That was really made many times out of plants and roses and flowers, but it was elaborate, right? A lot of work went into that. And only one wore that crown, and that was the victor. And so what he's saying here is that you go through trials and you come out stronger and victorious. And that's what he's talking about here, is this anticipation that we have. So blessed is the one that allows that to happen. And I close with this. There was a guy, or is a guy, great Christian writer. His name is Zig Ziglar. And he started off by writing to salespeople, because he was in sales, about how to motivate salesmen and how to help them influence people in the right way. And one of the terms that he had was no more stinking thinking. And I thought about that, and I thought that's really what often causes us to fail, is because we find ourselves in the midst of stinking thinking. And so I wrote these things down for us to think about as we leave here today, as we look at this being blessed in everything that we do. Okay? In the midst of the trial, that word hope I talked about, I want to just take a moment and park here and remind us of something that I wrote down that you can see on the screen. Faith is the substance of hope. So when someone says to you to have hope, what they're saying is trust God with that what you cannot do. Hope is not just some vain word. Okay? The Bible says that faith is the substance of things hoped. So it could be paraphrased as saying, have faith. So when I say I have hope, I'm saying I have faith. I have faith that God's going to see me through this. Did you know this? Hebrews 11:6 says this: without faith, which is to trust God, we cannot please him. Because here's where the rubber meets the road. To have this faith that is in essence hope, that will allow me to trust him, I have to, as we've written down here, I must believe that he exists and that he richly rewards those who seek after him. So therefore, if I say to you have hope, really I'm saying have faith in God. If I'm saying do you have faith in God, I could really say to you, do you realize God exists? And that he richly rewards those who diligently seek after him? And I wonder, that's a little bit longer, right? That's a longer sentence. But I wonder if I ought to start saying that more so than telling people to have hope. Or maybe even myself, instead of saying, yeah, I hope this will work out. Maybe I should change that to say, I'm glad that God exists and richly rewards those who diligently seek after him. I think that sounds pretty good. So as you're going through a trial, or if you're going through a trial right now, remember that God exists and he richly rewards those who diligently seek after him. Oh, and by the way, that's called having hope. Okay? God's plan is to give you hope. Did you know that? Jeremiah, once again, talking to a people that was scattered. Okay, they had a lot of scattering going on back in those days. I mean, they'd come in, man, and tear up towns and take people into exile, and I mean, they just, scattered. There was no, I'm gonna sneak out and go home because you were in a foreign land, you were a long ways away. It was bad. I mean, it was really, really bad, right? And Jeremiah wrote to a people in his day that were going through being scattered. Just like James is writing to his people who were scattered. And those scattered people and these scattered people were different people scattered at different times. And Jeremiah said to the people there, he said in verse 29:11, God has a plan. He says, for I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord. Plans not to harm you in your trial, but I have plans to give you something. Now, what are you going to give me? What are you going to give me? What are you going to give me? Hope. Hope. And a future. For the eyes of the Lord, in 1st and 2nd Chronicles, I forget right now, says, for the eyes of the Lord are looking throughout the whole earth to strengthen the hearts of those who are fully committed to him. That text just came to my mind. For the eyes of the Lord range the whole earth to strengthen the hearts of those who love him. And hope will never put you to shame. Because see, when you say I'm hoping this is going to work out in a biblical perspective, which means I have faith that God's going to do, which is what hope is, and that I realize that it pleases God when I believe that he exists. Really, I should take it the other way, right? Hope, faith, pleasing God by diligently seeking after him. That when those things happen, you will never be put to shame. Never. Romans, Paul said this, be joyful in hope. So that's a big deal. That was as they were going through stuff, it was a big deal. It's almost like a precious jewel. Don't let anyone or anything or yourself rob you of the preciousness of hope in God, in the trials you go through. Be joyful in hope. No stinking thinking. So as I leave here, consider the other side of the trials you go through. Okay? Think about what's happening in your life. Okay? Always trust him in every area of your life. Call upon him for his resources. Consider how you respond to the trials you go through. And contemplate the blessings that will happen when you trust him in the areas of life that are more than you can bear. And he promises that you're going to come out of the other end of that situation stronger. Amen.